I just want to love you more. I just want to love you more. I just want to love you more than yesterday. I just want to love you more. I just want to love you more. I just want to love you more than yesterday. I just want to love like you. I just want to love like you. I just want to love like you more than yesterday. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to Daring Dialogues. I am your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that you are having a great and wonderful day thus far. It is another fantabulous, wonderful Relationship Wednesday, and we are reading from the book on Wednesdays, Love Like That by Dr. Les Parrott. We are going to jump right in as we talk and we cover the topic being graceful. Being graceful. And I'm not quite sure how much of this chapter we're going to get through, but we're going to try to get through as much as possible. I will be ending the broadcast just a few minutes early so I can give an opportunity for those of you who may want to come on and share. Good morning, good morning, good morning, love. So, Love Like That is talking about 5 relationship secrets from Jesus. This book is all about improving our relationships one with another, whether that be romantic, whether that be our friendships, whether that be our professional relationships, whether that be our relationships with our family. We are on the third principle. The first principle we talked about was being mindful, being mindful. The second principle we talked about was being approachable. And now we are in the midst of the third principle, which is being graceful. Good morning, Deacon Henry. Good morning, Lady Barbara. For some reason, I cannot see your icons at the bottom on Periscope. So hopefully you all are down there, you're tuning in. Remember, you can pump those hearts so I know that you're there. Good morning, Lady Latoya. You can pump the heart so I know that you're there. You can make comments as we're reading so that I know that you're there and you're engaged. All right. So we're talking about what keeps us from being grace givers. What keeps us from being grace givers? This is an important subject because right now we are at a time in human history, especially here in the United States, where there's been a lot of scandals coming out, right? I would almost say more than normal because we know every society has scandals. You have people who are going to be doing criminal things, right? No society, no country is exempt from some level of criminality. But right now, we have we've got an academic cheating scandal. There's several sex scandals. There's several child abuse scandals. There's several financial scandals, right? All of these things are kind of happening all at the same time. And if you look at the attitude of people in general, people are not really having that much grace for any of this stuff that has come out, right? Most people are saying, throw them in prison forever, put them under the jail. They should go to jail. All this, in some cases, of course, rightly so, they need to deal with the consequences of what they have done, what act, what crime, or whatever. But one complaint definitely has been the unequalness of consequences, right? Because most people say, yes, there should be consequences, but then the issue has come up as to the level of consequences or the inequality in consequences based on whether it's a male or female or based on whether it's black or white. So I don't think anybody is debating whether or not consequences should occur. I think the conversation is more so in light of what has happened, what are appropriate consequences, and should those consequences be dealt across the board in a even manner? Meaning, if you do a similar crime, one person shouldn't get probation and the other person get 25 years to life. Like, that is not good, right? Because what it does is it takes away people's confidence that the justice system is going to do what it's designed to do. But then somebody said, well, the justice system is doing in some ways what it was designed to do, and that was to harshly punish people of color and poor people. So all of this debate is going on right now. And what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing where people are not really wanting to show grace. Keep in mind, we're all human. And keep in mind, there may come a time in your own life where you may need someone to show you grace. So today we're going to talk about what keeps us from being grace givers. And then we're going to give you some self-evaluation, some questions you can think about for yourself today. And then we're going to get into what Jesus taught about about giving grace, right? So let's see if we can get that far in our reading today. What keeps us from being grace givers? If you had to rate how well you offer the benefit of the doubt to others, or how much you appreciate perspectives that differ from your own, would you say that you're above average? Of course, nobody thinks of themselves as being closed-minded. That's why almost everybody is above average when it comes to how they perceive themselves. More surprising still is that relative to themselves, most people think others suffer from judgmentalism, but they themselves do not. Social scientists at Cornell University discovered this fact when testing people's competency levels. They concluded their study by saying, incompetent people don't know they're incompetent. Yeah, I've met a couple of, okay. I suppose it makes sense. We'd rather believe good things about ourselves than face the truth that we are pietistic or judgmental. So we deceive ourselves, and self-deception is a stepping stone to self-righteousness. It rubs us the wrong way to admit our faults, even to ourselves, not because we are narcissists, it's because we are human. We dismiss whatever doesn't jive with our self-image by seeing bad qualities in others. We do it without a second thought. In fact, we do it without a conscious thought. Some of the things that we might say is, why can't that mother control her unruly children? Unconsciously, we're saying, I wish I was a better parent. And when I judge this woman who appears to be struggling, I feel better about myself. That guy is constantly smiling. It's so obnoxious and phony. Unconsciously, we're actually saying, I wish I was a happier person. But since I'm not, I may feel better by judging the other person to be a fraud. Sometimes we can say things like, what a bunch of angry losers out there protesting on the streets. They need to get a job. Unconsciously, you could be thinking, their conviction and activism actually scares me. By calling them lazy, I can feel morally superior rather than getting up and joining them in the protest. Social scientists call this negativity bias. The rest of us call it judgmentalism. Like me, I'm guessing you don't think of yourself as judgmental. It's other people who are that way, right? But let's be honest, judgmental thoughts shoot through everyone's mind, lurking just beneath the surface of our conscious thinking. We think, I'm shocked and appalled by a person's behavior. I wouldn't think of doing such a thing. We need to clearly note how different we are from others who do despicable things. We want to underscore to ourselves that we would never sink to their level. It's a defensive move to protect our own purity, says author Terry Cooper. We need other people's faults in order to dodge our own, which I find very ironic because the scripture tells us to not dodge your faults, but it says, when you see someone else overtaken in a fault, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of meekness. And then what does it tell us to do? It doesn't tell us to dodge our faults. It says, consider your own self, lest you also be tempted, right? So judgmentalism finds its identity in what it is not. For this reason, we call on judgmentalism whenever we feel insecure. It puffs us up, feeding our self-deception, telling us we are better or we are superior. Like a drug that instantly relieves our pain, we tear others down to build ourselves up. We know the wise teaching, which is, do not judge or you too will be judged. But we are addicted to our delusion. Judgmentalism has a hold on us. We are mistaken to believe otherwise. We may think we are above average when it comes to being non-judgmental, but as Byron Langenfeld says, rare is the person who can weigh the faults of others without putting his thumb on the scales. Ouch. Ouch. Woo! Can you weigh the faults of others without putting your thumb on the scale? My, something to think about today. Judgmentalism will always be a part of us. We will always suffer from moral spasms of self-righteous judgment. The answer? Being less judgmental. Taking our thumb off the scales of judgmentalism is the goal. Why? Because judgmentalism keeps us from becoming better grace givers. You can't give grace while feeding self-righteousness. Somebody needs to quote Dr. Les Parrott today. You cannot give grace while feeding self-righteousness. Grace comes only from a humble heart. So, how graceful are you? Take a moment to honestly indicate how frequently you have experienced each of the following over the past week, and it will give you a little bit of clarity on how inclined you currently are to open your heart to others. All right? You can actually take this test at lovelikethatbook.com. This is chapter 3, and receive a summary of your progress along the way. So, think about these questions as we go through this list, and think about it in terms of this past week only. So from last week, Wednesday to now, how have you been doing on these particular things? All right, let's go. Number 1, I don't focus on having other people earn my respect. I just give it to them. I know a lot of people is probably at rarely or never on that. Why? Why do I say that? Because the saying goes, respect is not given, respect has to be earned. I've never really ascribed to that. Like, I just tend to be kind to people because I would want someone to be kind to me. However, if you show me the opposite after I'm kind to you, then I kind of back up and say, whoa, let's pull that back some, because this person obviously doesn't live by the same principles I live. So, yeah, I'll tone it down, but I'm not going to let you disrespect me. But I will generally be respectful to people. I don't ascribe to you have to earn my respect. But if you are disrespectful, I will respond. All right, number 2, I stay completely clear of criticizing others and fault finding. I don't think any of us can say never on that. Number 3, like Jesus, I separate the sin from the sinner. How well have you been doing at that this week? Or have you been looking at every story that comes through your timeline, especially social media? And how have you just been condemning everybody that comes through your timeline and sending them to hell? Have you been doing that? Stop. Number 4, I give love, respect, and appreciation freely to people who don't deserve it. I give love, respect, and appreciation freely to people who don't deserve it. Some of us work with people every day who show you they don't necessarily deserve love, respect, and appreciation, but you give it to them anyway. Have you been doing good at that this week? Ask yourself. 5, people who know me well would describe me as a grace giver. Do your friends, do your family describe you as a grace giver? Are you the person that people go to in the family because they know that they're going to find grace with you? Or are you the person that everybody in the family runs far, far away from and says, oh, if you are in trouble, do not tell so-and-so. Just don't tell them. Wait till you get out of trouble, because if you tell them, the whole neighborhood's going to know, and they're going to give you a lecture every time they see you until you get out of trouble. Are you that relative, or are you the relative that everybody goes to because they know that you're a gracious person, you're graceful, you're going to pray for them, you are going to tell them this wasn't a good decision, this wasn't right, but you're also going to offer grace? Are you that relative, or are you on the other spectrum? You're like the last person to know what's going on in the family because people consider you to be judgmental, so they don't tell you. I think I helped somebody right there with why you the last person to know. The reason why you're the last person to know is because you might be a little judgmental. And so people think if they tell you, you're going to fly off the handle. All right. 6, I know God loves me unconditionally. Now, I find it interesting that as human beings, we can know that God loves us unconditionally and we can bask in that unconditional love, but then we don't want the next person to receive that same unconditional love that God showers us with, right? We got to stop. Don't be selfish with the unconditional love of God. Share it. Share it. Let me see. 7, when I see someone acting in a way I don't like, I'm inclined to give them the benefit of the doubt until I better understand the situation. I have really had to work on this one, and I think I'm at a pretty good place where I'm at often. Oftentimes, if I see somebody acting up, acting strange, weird, in my opinion, I try to give people the benefit of the doubt and say, I don't know what that person is walking through or going through. Right. That's a good point, Lady Barbara. I try not to label people just because I don't understand why they're acting out the way they're acting out. Now, I wasn't always good at this. This is definitely an area I could say I've grown in. 8, I feel God's love in my life, and I know I receive it even when I don't deserve it. Have you felt the love of God in your life? Have you felt the comfort of God this week? Have you messed up this week, but you knew that God was not sending a lightning bolt down from heaven to strike you? Some people live under that kind of fear. They fear God in a very unhealthy way because they've been taught to fear God in a very unhealthy way. 9, I'm more inclined to have an open heart than an accusing finger. Open heart or accusing finger. And 10, I believe the best about people, even if they've been bad. I want the best for them. I think probably the clearest case that we could look at right now would probably be R. Kelly, right? I believe the best about people, even if they've been bad. I want the best for them. The reality is most people should want him to actually go get therapy and counseling. But the sad reality is all the people around him who either aided and abetted his behaviors, from parents to road managers to people in the Christian community, to the people who just sought him out for his ability and his skill to write and produce, they too failed him. Because the reality is he needs counseling and therapy. Some people say he's a master manipulator. He may be. But guess what? He actually needs to be delivered from being a master manipulator too, if that's the case. So, yes, is there a need for accountability? Yes. Is there a need for consequences? Yes. Is there a need for a trial? Definitely. But is there also need for therapy and rehabilitation and deliverance? Absolutely. That's the part we kind of leave off. We leave that off, but if it was us, we wouldn't want someone to throw us away. It's that simple. Would you want the whole of society to throw you away? We're good at throwing people away, but we don't know how to recycle them. Yeah. We're good at throwing people away. We're good at naming whatever the trash is, but we don't know how to redeem them. And so if you've never been in the business of redeeming, it can be an issue. All right. What Jesus taught us about giving grace. What Jesus taught us about giving grace. On a trip to Rome, he said, I received special permission to tour the Vatican Scavi, 2 floors beneath the massive St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. Believed to be the resting place of Jesus' first disciple, Peter, the partially excavated mausoleum is found by walking along a narrow and dimly lit underground street in the ancient city of the dead. The streets of the necropolis are similar to those of ancient Rome, only they are flanked by tombs instead of shops and apartments. Greek graffiti on the wall marks the spot. Peter is within. Something about walking along that street and standing in that place, the very spot where Peter was martyred 2,000 years ago, caused me to think about Peter's relationship with Jesus the Nazarene. Peter, more than any disciple, experienced grace on a personal level from Jesus. Excuse me. After all, Peter denied knowing Jesus even after declaring, I will never disown you. The emotional turmoil behind Peter's denial and later repentance and acceptance from Jesus are all the more meaningful when you consider a question he blurted out to Jesus one day. He said, We left everything and followed you. What do we get out of it? Peter is a man after my own heart. I would have probably been asking the same thing. Jesus understood Peter's question. In his trademark teaching style, Jesus told Peter a story of an estate manager who hired workers for his vineyard early in the morning. They agreed on $1 a day and went to work. Later, about 9 that morning, the manager saw some other men hanging around the town square unemployed. So he hired them. He did the same thing at noon and again at 3 o'clock and at 5. They all went to work in his vineyard. When the day's work was over, the owner of the vineyard instructed his foreman, call the workers in and pay them their wages, start with the last person hired, and then go on to the first. Those hired at 5 o'clock came up and were each given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed they would get far more, but they got the same, each of them $1. Taking the $1, they growled angrily to the manager, "These last workers put in only 1 easy hour, and you just made them equal to us, who slaved all day under a scorching sun." He replied to the one speaking for the rest, "Friend, I haven't been unfair. We agreed on the wage of $1, didn't we? So take it and go. I decided to give to the one who came last the same as you. Can't I do what I want with my own money? Are you going to get stingy because I am generous?" Talk about unconventional. If Peter was looking for a benefit plan in this parable, he didn't find the one he was expecting. Thinking that because he'd worked longer and harder than others, Peter assumed, like all of us, that he'd be rewarded accordingly. But the grace giver from Nazareth doesn't work according to a tiered system of reward. That's not how his vineyard operates. If you think you deserve more than others, you've forgotten how you got into the vineyard in the first place. When you compare your performance with others, you miss the point of the pay plan. Grace is not dependent on the hours you work. It's not dependent on the results you produce. Grace is not dependent, on the job you do. That's why in this grace-filled vineyard, the first are last and the last are first. It defies logic. In another parable, Jesus warned that farmers who concentrate on pulling up weeds may destroy the wheat along with it. His point? Judgmentalism uproots grace. Leave matters of judgment to the one true judge. Jesus talked often about grace, though he almost never used the word. He spoke in stories that illustrated it. But in some situations, he didn't mince words about criticizing others. He delivered a clear message about judgmentalism in his Sermon on the Mount. He said, "Don't pick on people. Don't jump on their failures. Criticize their faults. Unless, of course, you want the same treatment. That critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. It's easy to see a smudge on your neighbor's face and be oblivious to the ugly sneer on your own. Do you have the nerve to say, 'Let me wash your face for you,' when your own face is distorted by contempt?" It's this whole traveling roadshow mentality all over again, playing holier than thou instead of just living your part. Wipe that ugly sneer off your own face, and you might be fit to offer a washcloth to your neighbor. No need for interpretation here. Hypocrisy and self-righteousness are non-starters for Jesus. Quit nitpicking. Quit tearing down others to boost yourself up. You can't be hypocritical and a grace giver at the same time. It's an impossibility. If you judge others with a holier-than-thou attitude, you are sure to be judged in the same way. Jesus doesn't mince his words when it comes to judgmentalism negating grace. Writer Fyodor Dostoevsky said, "To love a person means to see him as God intended him to be." So, How do we become better grace givers? How to be a better grace giver. I had just stepped onto the platform in the Rose Garden Arena in Portland, Oregon, where nearly 10,000 people assembled for a marriage seminar. That night, each of the 6 speakers was to give a brief overview of what we would be speaking on over the next couple of days. Just before the rest of us went to the podium, my friend Gary Smalley captivated the crowd by holding up a crisp $50 bill and asking the massive audience who would like this $50 bill. Hands started going up everywhere. He said, "I'm going to give this $50 to one of you, but first let me do this." He proceeded to crumple up the bill. Then he asked, "Who still wants it?" The same hands went up in the air. "Well, what if I do this?" He dropped it on the ground and started to grind it into the floor with his shoe. "Now, who still wants it?" Again, hands went up into the air. You have all learned a valuable lesson. No matter what I do to the money, you still want it because it doesn't decrease in value. It is still worth $50. Gary's simple illustration underscores a profound point. Many times in our lives, we are dropped, we get crumpled, we get ground into the dirt by decisions, or we make circumstances bad for ourselves that many times comes our way. We may feel as though we are worthless, insignificant in our own or in others' eyes. But no matter what has happened or what will happen, we never lose our value if we choose to receive God's grace. People may try to devalue you, but God never does. Perhaps you've already internalized the message of that crowd that Portland heard, and you've already had a profound sense of God's grace in your life. Maybe you already know at the center of your being that your value has been established for all time. I can honestly tell you, there are a lot of people who don't know that. There are a lot of people who have staked their value in how other people see them, what other people think about them, the material goods that they can attain or that they have. They have staked their value in their position professionally. And all of those things, in many ways, can shape our life, but our value needs to be established for all time in God. Outside of everything you have, everything you own, outside of your social standing, outside of your professional career, outside of who likes you and who doesn't, your eternal value has been established for all time. Your lovability is rooted deep in God's unending love for you. You don't have to work harder for God to love you. You don't have to look better for God to love you. You don't have to win prizes of any kind for God to love you. You know and live the most crucial message ever articulated, that you have inestimable worth because you are a creation of the Creator. Chances are, however, that even if you have experienced this grace at some time, you may not feel unconditionally loved by God all the time. Research reveals that while many of us have heard the truth about our worth in God's eyes, most of the time we aren't able to incorporate it in our everyday life. It doesn't seem to really make a difference. We hear the message, we agree with it, and that's it. But instead of being confident in our unconditional acceptance, we feel it. We feel like we have to fall back into the habit of trying to earn it. Every single day, people fall back into this habit. You cannot earn the grace of God. You can't. You can't earn it by attending the right day to worship. You can't earn it by the length of your clothing. You can't earn it by however many Hail Marys to say. You can't earn grace. You can't earn it. All right? Even if we agree that our Creator loves us, we still end up feeling better about ourselves only when we are winning the approval of others. One of my friends calls this an addiction to people approval. And you have to ask God to deliver you from that addiction. We seem to be on a cosmic quest to establish our value, to prove it, earn it, and deserve it. Once we find what we're looking for, we relax, but only momentarily. Eventually, the people we are pleasing, whether a parent, a spouse, a friend, an advisory board, or an audience, quit sending us love messages. Ultimately, we find ourselves back on our endless quest. And that unfulfilling quest makes it nearly impossible to love like Jesus. Why? Because we can't give grace to others when we aren't receiving it and living in it ourselves. When we're busy earning acceptance from God, we start to think everyone else should earn it too. Because if you live under this principle, and I have seen it, you can tell the people who don't live out of grace, because everything for them is a condition, including your ability to be in their life. You start making people earn being in your life. Meaning, if they aren't giving you enough attention, if they aren't applauding you enough, if they aren't lavishing you with messages of affirmation, you feel like this person is not for you anymore, and you start cutting people off. It's sad and it's unfortunate. So when we do this, we start projecting onto people the way in which we're living. Meaning, if I'm living out of earning my place with God, then that means the people who enter my life are going to be earning their place with me. I'm going to make them earn it. And no matter how many times they've proved that they are a reliable person, that they are a faithful person, that they really care about me, I may spend the rest of my life making that person prove their worth to me. And guess what? That gets exhausting. People who have been faithful in your life get tired of proving themselves to you all the time. At some point, you have to trust the relationships and the friendships that you have and that you're building. So judgmentalism creeps in. Self-righteousness appears. If you want to be a better grace giver, you've got to continually and consciously receive the grace that God gives to you. I can be gracious to others because I live in grace, I'm walking in grace, and I know that everything I am and everything that I have is by the grace of God. Period. And at some point, everybody has to get to that place of appreciating and living out and walking in the grace of God, knowing that no matter how good you are in the flesh, you cannot earn your place with God. And as much as our human effort wants to get involved, we want to work, we want to earn, we want to do something, right? It takes a lot to receive the grace of God, because our inclination is to do something to earn it. Whoever has been forgiven only a little, Jesus said, loves only a little. The more grace we receive, the more love and grace we are apt to give. When we aren't cognizant of God's unconditional acceptance in our own lives, we cannot give it to others. Judgmentalism sees to it. Here's the truth. God's grace is received, not achieved. Now, this is going to be more difficult for people whose entire life thrives off of achievement. If your life thrives off of, I've got to achieve, I've got to win, I've got to earn. If your life thrives off of rewards, This concept you might struggle with because grace is received, it's not achieved. You can't achieve grace. You can only receive it. God's grace does not depend on what we have done for God, but rather what God has done for us. And continually receiving God's grace in the deepest and most central parts of our beings is the only true and lasting remedy to ugly judgments and holier than thou attitudes. C.S. Lewis said to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. Everything about our sin was inexcusable, but grace. We deserved an eternal judgment, but grace. It was the grace of God that allowed us to have access to Christ. Love is not the cause of grace. It is the proof of grace. When we are conscious of God's grace in our own lives, we are automatically more loving and accepting of others. I'm not naive about our judgments. I don't think it's possible to live a life where we never judge anyone ever. But once you embrace God's grace, once you begin to raise your consciousness around this gift that you have been continually given, yet you have been given it continually, you get immeasurably closer to loving like Jesus. What would happen in your life? This is a reflection moment. What would happen in your life if God stopped giving you grace? What things would fall apart if God stopped giving you grace? What wouldn't you be able to do if God stopped giving you grace? If he just decided, Sarah's health has been running on grace. I think I'm just going to cut off grace in that area and see how she does. Listen, I know for a fact it was grace that was keeping me alive when I didn't know I was dying. Grace, not my knowledge, because I didn't know. Not my exercise or my health routine, because I didn't know. So we really need to think about how we're handing out grace to people and how we are withholding grace from people. Grace ultimately is a choice. Clara Barton, founder of the Red Cross, was talking with a friend one day when the name of a person they knew came up. Years before, that person had treated Clara in a terribly unkind way. The friend asked Barton, "Don't you remember when she did that to you?" "No, I distinctly remember forgetting that." Ever considered the difference between mercy and grace? Yes, I have. Clara Barton made a choice, a tough choice, and it's the same one you and I make whenever we offer grace. Let's hear when you can. Well, many times people say that God has mercy on us, or mercy is what you receive when you deserve something else. Like God shows you, he gives you mercy. Is what God gives you when you do deserve something. And grace is what God gives you without deserving anything at all. It's not based on anything. Mercy is what we plead for when God should give us. When we do deserve something, mercy steps in. when we have no need to deserve anything at all, God gives us grace. It's unmerited, it's undeserved. I've learned a way to make this tough choice a little easier, she said. It has to do with curiosity. Curiosity, said Albert Einstein, has its own reason for existing. So Clara Barton said that she made a distinct choice to forget what that person had done to her. And she said, it's the same choice that you and I make whenever we offer grace to people. And it has to do, she said, with curiosity, in reference to Albert Einstein saying curiosity has its own reason for existing. And maybe this is it. The next time you sense a judgmental spasm in your heart, think about curiosity. Why? Because curiosity squelches criticism and stiff arms judgmentalism. Curiosity creates a space for grace. How? Almost every evaluation we make of others arises from incomplete information. Raise your hand or pump the hearts if somebody has made a judgment about you clearly from incomplete information. Oh, Lord. I'll tell you my favorite. I'm going to tell you my favorite judgment. My favorite judgment that people make about me and my husband is that we're still homeless. Yep. There are people that we see that we knew when we first got to Virginia. Oh, I'm laughing. You know I'm laughing. There are people who met us when we first got to Virginia, when we were literally thrown into a pit, literally thrown into some pits. And their first question out of their mouth when they see us is, so where are y'all living at? And the reason why that's the first question out of their mouth is because the people that they engaged in conversation with about us told them our business, told them what we were going through, and they never got updated information. So they're still going off of what happened in 2011 when we moved to Virginia. Now, when I see these people, I just laugh because that was where we were 8 years ago. And because you were given incomplete information, you still think that's where we are. Now, somebody's going to ask me, well, why don't you correct them? Why don't you correct their misconception? I'm not correcting it. I'm not correcting it because guess what? The person who fed them the misinformation needs to correct it. See, I don't think like everybody else. I figure the person who gave you the misinformation needs to update themselves and they need to come back and they need to correct what they spoke to you. It is not my responsibility to correct misinformation. It's only my responsibility to live out Christ. And if you really want to know, then you will find out what's going on in my life right now. But hey, if you want to stay with 8-year-old information, that's on you. That's not on me. I'm just saying. So people can make judgments about you based on incomplete information. And oftentimes that incomplete information is coming from a gossip. That's another reason why I'm not going to correct it. Because again, the person who gossiped needs to be the one to correct what they said. Why would I take away their responsibility? Why would I take away their opportunity to get it right? We fill in the gaps, he says, of what we don't know with prejudicial judgments. When people have incomplete information, they will start filling in the gaps and they will come up. Anybody ever played the telephone game? Right? One person says a statement and they are supposed to pass that statement on. And by the time it gets to the other end, it's completely different. Why? Because there's incomplete information, or there's misinterpreted information, or somebody did not hear correctly, so they didn't speak correctly. And now by the time it gets to the other end, it's something completely different. Well, that happens in real life. And we tend to fill in the gaps of what we don't know with prejudicial judgment or incomplete information. We start embellishing. And so one statement about someone looking for a place to stay turns into they're homeless, they're this, they're that, and they have a whole story embellished. They have a whole story embellished. By the time it gets back to you, you're like, oh, really? I did that? Oh, really? Right? So curiosity, as he says, curiosity, however, keeps our judgments at bay. It opens our mind to the possibility that there is something about the situation that we don't fully understand. When you see someone you think is acting insane or acting stupid or worse, ask yourself this: I wonder what's going on with that person that I don't know about. Again, I had to learn this. I had to develop this practice that he's talking about of curiosity, letting curiosity take the place of judgment. Because the reality is you don't know what's happening in that person's life. A person could be homeless and it be no fault of their own. But oh my gosh, you better pray that you never have to be homeless in order to understand that. Because you are around here throwing judgments about homeless people and calling them dirty and calling them lazy and calling them uneducated and saying they just don't want to work. When in reality, many of them do work, full-time jobs. Some of them have 2 and 3 jobs. And their money still does not add up to enough for them to actually get housing, because they might live in a city that has priced them out of basic housing. But you wouldn't know that if you've never been homeless. But you could learn that if you let curiosity take the place of judgment. If you said, I don't know why they're homeless, I wonder why they're homeless. Let me look into it. Let me ask them some questions. Why are you out here panhandling? So I let curiosity take the place of judgment. That's an example. Let curiosity take the place of judgment, and don't be so quick to make a judgment about what you only have incomplete information about. It will save you some embarrassment many times. This little question is an accelerant to grace and a deterrent to being sanctimonious, self-righteous, pious, and arrogant. But don't be fooled. Asking yourself this curiosity question is not easy. Judging people is much more easier. It's easier than asking the hard questions. This question requires work. It demands that you have empathy and a healthy dose of self-control. You have to press your emotional pause button. Here's what people aren't doing with the latest, I will say the latest couple of cases. I was thinking about what's happening with music industry, and the last thing I saw that came out had to do with Kanye West. Now, a lot of people are upset with Kanye West because of some of the positions that he's taken, right? But an article recently came out that said Kanye West cannot get out of his music contract, and that his music contract literally states that he basically is not allowed to retire. Now, I want you to think about that phrase. What's another phrase for not allowed to retire? What's the word for that? Anybody know? Not that you can work for 10, 15, 20 years, put out, contracted to put out a certain amount of albums. Thank you. Thank you, Lady Barbara. It's called slavery. The true word for not allowed to retire ever is slavery. So his contract is written where he is not allowed to retire. That's slavery. But then curiosity stepped in, and I started being curious about who owns this company that he is not allowed to retire from. And come to find out, his company is owned by Sony. That made me be a little bit more curious. So I started going back and I started thinking and I started saying, let's see, let's go down the line. Michael Jackson was with Sony. We see how that ended. Prince was with Sony. We see how that ended. Whitney Houston was with Sony. We see how that ended. R. Kelly is with Sony. We see how that's going. And Kanye West, who has been hospitalized a couple of times for mental issues, is also with Sony. What is the common thread between all of these people who are with Sony? I'll let you figure it out. So again, when we suspend judgment on a thing and we allow curiosity to step in and we start asking questions, we might actually wind up with a different conclusion than had we just looked at the surface of a thing and judged it based on what is being currently put out. All right. So this type of questioning demands that you have empathy. It demands that you suspend your emotions to ask some questions. All right. You have to press your emotional pause button. Yes, some of the things that R. Kelly and Kanye West have done make you really upset. But suspend judgment and ask some questions. Why is it all of a sudden that these two are being put out in the way that they're being put out when they have been darlings of their industries? Question. Just think on it. You might have to wait a beat. Someone makes a vicious comment about another person who doesn't deserve it. Maybe it's you. You want to lash out, but you pause. Why would a grown person act in such a mean-spirited way? That's it. This curiosity question is all it takes to put self-righteousness on hold. This question ushers guilt to the side and gives grace the opportunity to enter the scene. A rabbi taught that experiences of God can never be planned or achieved. They are spontaneous moments of grace, almost accidental. I have just a little bit left to read in this chapter, and I want to go ahead and finish it. So if you all will give me some grace here, give me about 5 minutes, we'll be done with this chapter. His student asked, Rabbi, if God realization is just accidental, why do we work so hard doing all these spiritual practices? The rabbi replied, to be as accident prone as possible. The same is true of spontaneous moments of grace. These moments where we replace condemnation with undeserved love. You see, the more we practice curiosity, the more likely grace is to infuse our relationships, and the more likely we are to love like Jesus. Franklin P. Adams said, to err is human, to forgive is infrequent. So, here are some things to ponder as we close today. What do you make of the sentiment that says mercy is getting spared from bad things that you deserve, and grace is getting good things that you don't deserve? Put yourself in a temple classroom where Jesus was teaching with the religious leaders who brought in a woman caught in adultery. What would be going through your mind as they began to put Jesus on the spot? Would you have agreed with the grace-giving response of Jesus, or would you have been in the crowd saying, stone her to death? Do you think you are above average when it comes to being non-judgmental? Most people think they are more grace-giving than they actually are. In this grace-filled vineyard that Jesus described in the parable to Peter and the other disciples, he said that the last are first and the first are last. How does this sit with you? Be honest. Does it rub you the wrong way that people who come in after you will be receiving the same reward? Chances are that you believe God loves you, but when it comes down to it, are you like most people who continually think that they have to earn God's love? In what ways do you fail to believe that God loves you unconditionally? God's unconditional love on personal levels becomes the fuel for loving others. Ask yourself today, do you have fuel to love others? Or is your tank empty because you're stuck judging? This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I've been your host today, Shantae Charles. I hope that we have said something today that will get you thinking about your relationships, thinking about grace, thinking about unearned privilege. That's what grace is. It's unearned. You can't earn it. You can't work for it. And also thinking about how are you going to show grace to others in your life. If you understand the grace that God has given to you, it shouldn't be too hard to understand the responsibility to show grace as you have been given it. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Take care, and God bless.